He wasn't loud, never raised his voice, never made threats. In meetings, he listened more than he spoke. People liked him, said he had integrity, said he was solid. But over time, one by one, the confident became unsure, the outspoken went quiet, and those who once trusted their instincts started questioning everything except him. That's how real power moves: quiet, clean, under the radar. The most dangerous people aren't the ones who rage or threaten. They don't kick down doors or scream for attention. The most dangerous ones look like allies. They mirror your values, echo your frustrations, and slowly gain your trust. Then they steer you. Not by force, but by influence. And if you ever sense something's off, they're already too deep inside your world for you to pull the thread. We like to think danger wears a clear face, that villains announce themselves. But the modern manipulator doesn't need to be a dictator. They can be a coworker, a mentor, a friend, someone who understands human behavior well enough to use your own instincts against you. What makes them dangerous isn't what they do once. It's how they think. How they build your trust while quietly removing your options. How they make you doubt yourself while keeping their hands clean. They don't just lie, they curate your reality. You end up second-guessing your memory, your perception, your boundaries. And they always wear a mask of virtue. That's what keeps them hidden. The smile, the sympathy, the support. All of it designed to lower your guard. And while you're feeling safe, they're watching. Measuring, planning. So here's the question. How do you defend yourself against someone who never looks like a threat? We're not talking about criminals. We're not talking about rage or chaos. We're talking about something colder, something calculated. People who don't break rules, they rewrite them. Who don't use weapons, they use you. This isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. If you've lived long enough, you've already met them. Maybe you didn't see it at the time. Maybe you still don't. But something inside you knows the cost. And now it's time to see the structure behind the mask. Niccolo Machiavelli wrote The Prince in the early 1500s. Not as a guide for tyrants, but as a brutal observation of how power actually works. He didn't celebrate cruelty, he explained it. He made one thing clear. If you want to lead, you don't need to be good. You need to appear good. Reputation is armor, image is leverage. Machiavelli knew people judge on appearance, not substance. So he advised rulers to wear the mask, act generous when needed, speak of virtue often, but behind closed doors, do what must be done to keep control. Most people are more loyal to comfort than to truth, and those who understand this rule quietly shape the game. Centuries later, Carl Jung added a psychological layer to the same pattern. He called it the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress, deny, or hide. Rage, insecurity, envy, cruelty. The more we pretend these parts don't exist, the more power they have over us. When left unconscious, they don't disappear. They rot and metastasize. And in some, they weaponize. The most dangerous individuals often aren't the openly hostile. They're the ones who repress everything dark within themselves, then wear a clean, curated self-image to the world. They believe their own disguise. And when that internal tension breaks through the mask, the damage is precise and cold. This is the hidden architecture of quiet manipulation. The external mask of virtue concealing an internal war that's already been lost. Then there's Dr. Robert Hare, a modern psychologist. He studied psychopaths, not the killers Hollywood gives you, but the ones in boardrooms, courtrooms, and corner offices. The ones who follow the rules but write them for themselves. No guilt, no conscience, just calculation. They don't use violence, they use charm. They mirror your language, your tone, your values, and they do it better than most people who mean it. They're not rare. That's the problem. Hare's research suggests that high-functioning psychopaths are disproportionately found in positions of authority, where image matters more than empathy, where the system rewards detachment, and where power is built not on brute force but emotional leverage. What ties these thinkers together is not fear, it's clarity. They saw something most people don't want to admit. Manipulation thrives not in chaos, but in civility. It doesn't look like a threat. It looks like leadership, charisma, even friendship. This isn't about history, it's about a pattern that never went away. And it still works, because it still hides in plain sight. Most people think manipulation looks like aggression, pressure, lies, someone trying to get something from you. They imagine the con artist, the narcissist, the obvious red flags, and that's the first mistake. Because the most effective manipulators don't push. They pull. They give before they take. They create comfort, not conflict. They offer help, praise, attention, until you're no longer sure where your choices end and theirs begin. This is what manipulation looks like on the surface. A coworker who always plays the victim but somehow controls every group dynamic. A friend who subtly questions your other relationships until you're isolated. A partner who mirrors your values so perfectly that you stop checking for inconsistencies. A mentor who flatters your ambition but slowly makes you dependent on their approval. The common thread isn't dominance. It's access. They don't force themselves in. You let them in because you want to, and that's what makes it hard to see. We're wired to trust warmth, empathy, familiarity, and smart manipulators know how to simulate all of it. They mimic your language. They share your frustrations. They reflect your energy. It feels like connection. It's actually control. And when something finally feels off, when the charm slips or the support turns into pressure, you hesitate. Because you've already invested. You've already told them things. You've already tied part of your identity to their approval. That's when the emotional hooks start to sink in. You question yourself, not them. You start to think maybe you overreacted. Maybe you're being too sensitive. Maybe they're right and you're just hard to please, hard to understand, hard to trust. That internal conflict is the real trap. Because once you stop trusting your own instincts, they don't need to manipulate you anymore. You'll do it to yourself. And when it all starts to break down, your confidence, your judgment, your independence, it won't feel like an attack. It'll feel like confusion, like self-doubt, like maybe you're the problem. That's the surface. Now we go deeper. Manipulators don't guess. They study, they don't react, they calculate. This isn't about instinct, it's about structure. Repeatable patterns that exploit how trust works, how attention moves, and how uncertainty spreads. It starts with mirroring. Most people don't realize how deeply we're drawn to those who reflect us. Shared interests, shared struggles, shared values. Mirroring creates a psychological shortcut. It tells your brain, this person is safe, they're like me. The manipulator watches what you respond to, then feeds it back to you. Voice tone, word choice, body language, beliefs, even your humor. It's not real connection, it's behavioral code. Once trust is established, they isolate leverage points. Insecurity, ambition, loneliness, fear of rejection. Whatever it is, they find it. Not by confronting it, but by offering comfort. A manipulator doesn't expose your weakness, they soothe it. They offer what feels like support, but it's access. And once they're inside, they build a loop. You feel seen, you feel understood, you feel validated, but only through them. And then the testing begins. Small boundary pushes, offhand comments, reframing your doubts as overreactions. It's subtle, it's slow, but each test has one goal: compliance. If you push back, they retreat and reset. If you yield, they move further in. This is how people end up doing things they never thought they'd do. Not because they were forced, because the frame changed. What once seemed unacceptable now feels reasonable, necessary, even deserved. And this structure isn't chaotic, it's patterned. Dr. Robert Hare called it impression management, a deliberate system of charm, credibility, and control. These individuals know how to gain power without raising alarms. They make you defend their behavior. They make you question your memory. They rewrite your narrative so gradually it feels like your own. Gaslighting is part of the system, not an outburst. It's not always about outright denial. Sometimes it's a smile and a soft, "Are you sure?" Just enough to plant doubt. And once you doubt your reality, theirs becomes dominant by default. Another structural tactic is induced dependency. They slowly remove your outside anchors, other friends, other perspectives, your own routines. In their absence, you become more reliant on the manipulator. Not because you're weak, but because your context has been restructured. What looks like connection is actually containment. What feels like guidance is subtle domination. And what seems like support is conditional access to your own sense of worth. None of it looks violent. None of it feels extreme. But that's the point. The most effective manipulation never needs to raise its voice. It just rearranges the room until you forget where the door was. The truth isn't hidden. We just don't want to look at it. Manipulation works because most people would rather feel safe than be right. We cling to the idea that people are mostly good, that trust is natural, that if someone smiles and helps and listens, they mean well. It's not foolish, it's human. But it's also the entry point. The resistance doesn't come from the manipulator, it comes from inside us. We don't want to believe we've been used. We don't want to accept that someone we cared about studied us, mirrored us, exploited our needs. So we downplay the signs. We give the benefit of the doubt. We tell ourselves, they didn't mean it like that. And every time we excuse the discomfort, we reinforce the trap. This internal resistance is amplified by culture. We're taught to be agreeable, to avoid conflict, to prioritize empathy, especially in relationships and work. So when something feels off, we suppress the instinct. We don't want to seem cold, paranoid, or dramatic. We second-guess the signal, and that hesitation is exactly what the manipulator needs. There's also the sunk cost problem. By the time doubts surface, we've already invested time, energy, emotion, reputation. Cutting ties would mean admitting we were wrong. It would mean facing the pain, the embarrassment, the betrayal. So instead, we double down. We rationalize. We try harder. And the manipulator watches as we do their job for them. Another layer of resistance is identity fusion. When someone has mirrored us for long enough, we start tying our sense of self to them. They feel like part of us. Questioning them starts to feel like questioning who we are. That's the final lock. When your protector is your parasite, clarity feels like betrayal. This is why the mask works so well. It's not that the manipulator is invisible, it's that we refuse to see. Not because we're blind, because we're attached. And when attachment is stronger than awareness, the damage becomes self-sustaining. The mask isn't just for you, it's for them too. People don't wake up one day and decide to become manipulators. Most of them don't even realize what they're doing. They've spent years building an identity that looks kind, competent, trustworthy. They need that image to survive. Not because they're evil, but because without the mask, there's nothing solid underneath. That's the quiet shift. The real manipulator isn't always a predator. Sometimes it's a deeply fragile person trying to outrun their own shadow. Carl Jung called it the repression of the unconscious. The parts of ourselves we refuse to face don't just go away. They find ways to act out. The more someone denies their resentment, jealousy, inferiority, the more those things leak out sideways. Through control, through guilt-tripping, through subtle sabotage. When manipulation is a strategy for survival, it becomes automatic, not planned, not malicious, just necessary to preserve the illusion of self-worth. And here's where it gets harder to admit. Most people carry some version of this. We all wear masks. We all want to be seen a certain way. The difference isn't how far we're willing to go to protect that image. The more someone fears being exposed, the more they rely on control. The more they build their identity around being good or right or harmless, the more dangerous they become when challenged. Because the mask can't crack. If it does, they collapse. This is why some of the most dangerous people look so harmless. Their identity depends on never appearing like a threat. Their manipulation is quiet, refined, almost invisible, because it's the only way they know how to hold themselves together. And this isn't limited to personal relationships. Look at institutions, governments, corporations, public figures. The same pattern holds. The more polished the image, the more you should question what had to be buried to keep it clean. The real shift is seeing manipulation not just as strategy, but as symptom. Not every manipulator is a monster, but every manipulator is hiding something they refuse to confront. And the longer it stays hidden, the more power it gains. The unspoken rule is simple. People don't want the truth. They want comfort that feels like truth, and if you can give them that, just enough warmth, just enough certainty, just enough familiar language, you can lead them anywhere. This is what skilled manipulators understand better than anyone else. Most people aren't looking for clarity. They're looking for relief, from doubt, from isolation, from fear. And if you can remove that tension, they'll trade you their trust, their autonomy, even their judgment, without ever feeling like they've given anything up. That's the rule. Real control doesn't require force. It only requires belief. The belief that they're one of us. The belief that they care. The belief that they wouldn't do that. Once that belief is in place, everything else becomes optional. You can contradict yourself. You can pressure. You can isolate. You can harm. And people will still protect you because they're not defending you. They're defending the idea of you, the comfort you represent. That's why it's so hard to confront manipulation. It's not just about behavior, it's about belief systems. Questioning the manipulator means questioning your own judgment, your own values, your own past choices. That's a high price. Most won't pay it. And the manipulators know this. That's why they focus on perception more than action. Why they invest so much in image. Why they speak in borrowed values and familiar slogans. Not to deceive you, but to create just enough alignment that your guard stays down. The unspoken rule is this: it's not the manipulator who holds the real power. It's the people around them who refuse to see. And until that refusal breaks, the mask stays on. You don't need to become paranoid. You need to become precise. The most effective defense against manipulation isn't suspicion, it's pattern recognition. Instead of asking, is this person good or bad? Ask, what do their actions repeat over time? Here's how you start. Watch for consistency. Words are cheap. Track behavior. Do they say one thing and do another? Do they shift their values depending on the audience? Is their kindness situational, strategic? Patterns matter more than impressions. Slow down your trust. Most people give it away too fast. Real trust is earned, not through charm, but through time, pressure, and contradiction. Don't judge people by how they treat you when things are easy. Judge them by how they respond when you say no. Notice emotional manipulation, guilt, pressure, silent treatment, shifting blame. These aren't emotional responses, they're tactics. If someone regularly makes you feel responsible for their reactions, step back. Emotional responsibility is the baseline of any real relationship. Guard against dependency. Manipulators build systems of reliance. They make you feel like they're your only anchor, emotionally, professionally, or socially. Maintain other sources of truth. Friends who speak plainly. Routines that center you. If one person controls your reality, you've already lost it. Set boundaries and watch the reaction. The boundary isn't just for protection, it's a test. Healthy people respect limits. Manipulators test them. If someone reacts with guilt, blame, or withdrawal when you draw a line, take it seriously. Their respect was conditional. Stay connected to your instincts. If something feels off, stop explaining it away. You don't need to justify discomfort to validate it. The longer you override your internal signals, the more disoriented you become. Stillness sharpens instinct. Noise dulls it. Don't fix people. You're not responsible for someone else's wounds. You can have compassion without sacrificing clarity. If someone's darkness becomes your burden, you're no longer helping. You're enabling. And finally, know when to walk away. This isn't about confrontation. It's about self-preservation. You don't need permission. You don't need closure. You don't need to prove anything. The most powerful move is often the quietest, to leave without fanfare, without apology, and without looking back. Protection doesn't always look like a shield. Sometimes it's just silence, space, boundaries, and above all, presence. Because when you see clearly, you stop being an easy target. The ones who harm you the most rarely look like enemies. They look like someone you once trusted, someone who knew the right things to say, someone who seemed to understand you better than most. That's what makes it effective, and that's what makes it dangerous. Most people don't see it until they're too entangled to pull free without pain. By then, the damage is already done. Confidence eroded, instincts dulled, independence compromised. But if you've lived through it, you know. You see the signs earlier now. You sense the manipulation in the smile that comes too quickly, in the compliment that lands a little too perfectly, in the way the conversation always bends toward their advantage. You don't always have proof, but you feel it. And this time, you don't ignore it. Because once you learn how quiet control sounds, you never unhear it. You don't need revenge. You don't need a breakdown. You don't even need to explain yourself. You just need stillness, awareness, the kind of presence that doesn't flinch, doesn't justify, doesn't chase. That's where the power is, not in being harder, just in being harder to fool.